FPL Game Week 9 transfer targets. In today's video, we're going to have a look at the best players you should be considering buying into your team going into Game Week 9. We'll have a little bit of an update on some highly owned players that you are thinking about selling from your team, like the likes of Dominic Slanky, like the likes of the Liverpool assets who haven't had the best returns over the past few weeks. We'll talk about a few really spoken about players like those cheap forwards and those premium midfielders and discuss a few other players in today's transfer targets. What is up, everyone? FPL Harry here. Before we dive in, 2,000 likes is the aim. Subscribe if you're new around here. And today we are having a look at those best players to buy. Just before we do, apologies. I said it in my last video in the comments. I'm in Portugal this week. I'm doing my best to get the videos out as normal. If the sound or the video is very slightly different, that is why. But again, the videos are coming as and when I have time to do them. And fingers crossed we get them all out this week. Again, off the back of a very, very poor week. Although Chris Wood did get a return, so I didn't quite have a team full of blanks with 11, but it wasn't my best week of FPL. And of course, Bukayo Saka was not in the squad for Arsenal on Tuesday evening in the Champions League, so we might be looking to sell him. Now, before we dive in, this video once again is being sponsored by Fantasy Football Scout. If you want to check out their members area where I look at fixture tickers, I compare players, I have a look at the data they've had so far this season and in previous seasons as well. You can do that with the link in the description, which does offer you a discount as well as supporting the channel. Now, to discuss a few players which I know you are considering selling this week, let's start off at Arsenal. The first one is the Arsenal defence, particularly Saliba, but also Gabriel and Raya, because they haven't kept a clean sheet in their Leicester, Southampton or Bournemouth games, which of course are the easier fixtures they've got, and they now have a few more difficult games over the next few weeks. Bukayo Saka in the midfield, of course, has been a big doubt. Didn't feature at the weekend when we thought he would. Well, I thought he would, because I kept him. And then, of course, in the Champions League midweek, I am now considering for my own team moving on Saka to someone like a Son or even going straight to a Cole Palmer. I am also considering moving off one of my Arsenal defenders as well. If you do have Saliba, I don't mind selling him at all. He's also fine to bench if you do have a strong bench. There's no definitive answer on Saliba, but given he doesn't have quite the goal threat that Gabriel has, I probably would look to sell. Looking at Gabriel and Raya, if you have a double up, you could consider selling one of them, but generally I would think that they are decent holds for after this week and maybe bench if you can this week. Bukayo Saka again, let's wait to see if we get a news on the injury going into the weekend, but it is looking more and more like it might be a sell. Now, it might just be that he was rested for the Champions League fixture, given it is against Shakhtar, and they have the big fixture against Liverpool at the weekend. So again, if possible, wait and see. Next up is Trent Alexander-Arnold. Of course, the fixture for Liverpool last week and this week are not looking great, but from game week 10, they do start a better run of fixtures. He is 7 million, and with the attacking returns, I think it's pretty clear that he's not returning enough going forward to warrant that price tag. So if you are looking to free up money to do another move, I do quite like it. And I'm actually considering potentially going to Konate of Liverpool, which is just 5.3 million to free up a whole host of money. The final one is Dominic Slanky. So for me, Dominic Slanky is not a buy, but he is a keep. If you've got him, I would still give him a couple more games, particularly waiting until that Ipswich at home game to see if he can get a few more returns. It does look like he is dropping deep, and it's going to be Son and Brennan Johnson and Kulusevski who get more returns, but he's still involved to some extent. So for me, he is a keep at the moment, despite the returns over the past few weeks. Next up, the big player to discuss probably in this video is Erling Haaland. Now, he's not in here because he's a player to buy, but because he's massively impacting the rest of the transfers that we are making and the teams that we have. The first thing to note, in game week 9, he has Southampton at home, and I don't think anyone watching this video who owns Erling Haaland is going to sell him before Southampton at home. Partly because also the forwards you might want to buy in the likes of Cunha goes away to Brighton, and the places you'd reinvest money in the likes of Salah or potentially an Arsenal attacker, they play against each other this week as well. So there's no real reason to be selling Erling Haaland this week, but there is definitely a discussion that needs to be had from game week 10 onwards. Should we be considering selling him to free up money to go for someone like a Salah who has returned to a little bit of form? So there are a few windows that you could do to go and sell Erling Haaland. The first one is game week 10, straight after that Southampton fixture. The next one is in game week 12 when he plays against Spurs, and the next one is later in about game week 14, which is really when the Liverpool fixtures start to look nice again after that Manchester City versus Liverpool fixture in game week 13. So there are a few opportunities to potentially sell Erling Haaland, and no returns in the past 3. The data hasn't been as good. The shot record hasn't been as good. Of course, there's no Rodri, and of course, there's no Kevin De Bruyne as well. So yes, there is a reason to sell Erling Haaland. And yes, it is on my radar that I might want to sell him. Do I think I'll sell him in game week 9? Absolutely not. Do I think it will happen in game week 10? Probably not. It might happen in game week 12. It might wait until game week 14 because that's when the likes of Ollie Watkins also has a nice run of fixtures. And to be fair, in my team, I've got enough other things to sort. So right now, Erling Haaland is a keep. And let's say he scores twice against Southampton, we might all feel differently, right? And that is a fixture he is very able to do it in. So Haaland, yes, it's a blank in the past 3. And yes, they haven't looked as good without Rodri and without Kevin De Bruyne. But for now, he's a keep. Next up, let's have a look at Tottenham Hotspur. So we will talk about Heung-min Son in a moment, but it's a slightly different conversation because of the price that he is coming in at. We can start off by having a look at their defenders, and I just am not confident that they'll keep massively loads of clean sheets. They are just finding ways to concede goals. Now, Porro at 5.5 just absolutely doesn't feel like he's worth the money at the moment. Van der Ven you can go for if you just need an affordable option at 4.7, but you're really looking at the attackers. As we spoke about earlier on, Dominic Solanke is not a buy. He is a hold if you have him, but we're really looking at the midfielders. Now, Maddison came off at half-time. I do think he'll probably start the next one, but he's definitely a risk because of how well they played when he wasn't in the team, which means you can't go and buy James Maddison. It is Kulusevski or it is Brennan Johnson, but there is a slight chance that Maddison starts and Kulusevski doesn't, for example, and we are expecting Brennan Johnson. So for me now, Brennan Johnson is the only Spurs player outside of Heung-min Son that I would consider buying into my team. The defenders leak too many goals. Maddison and Kulusevski might rotate because of that slight change in system. We've got Son, which we'll talk about in a moment, who's of course a great pick. But outside of that, if you need an affordable option, it should just be Brennan Johnson. Moving into a cheap defender, and it is Wolves time. We'll talk about Cunha, we'll talk about Strand Larsen, and then it is, of course, Ryan Aït-Nouri. Looking at those fixtures, they have a great run. You don't need to necessarily go straight in and dive in game week 9, but from game week 10 onwards, the fixtures are there, and the fixtures look really, really solid. Ryan Aït-Nouri does have the attacking threat. He's had 4 attacking returns so far this season. A return every sort of 45 minutes that he's been on the pitch. Expected to get a return every 5 games, which is really, really strong for a defender, given that they've had the most difficult run to the start of the season. I know the clean sheets are not as good, but if you've watched them, they've actually put up good performances in a lot of games they had so far this season. So if you need a cheap defender, now is the time to buy Ryan Aït-Nouri for the long term. Last week, we spoke about the premium midfielders, and things have changed quite a lot because, of course, the Bukayo Saka major doubt going into the weekend. The first thing, of course, to note is we are hopefully going to get some news between now and the weekend on Saka, but looking outside of him, Mo Salah, of course, returned twice against Chelsea. He did look really good. Liverpool did look pretty good going forward, but it is Arsenal and then Brighton in the next 2 for them. Phil Foden didn't start for Manchester City, which is a massive surprise given that there was no Kevin De Bruyne in the squad, but that just means he's a risk going forward because the longer we go on, the closer it is for Kevin De Bruyne making a return and making Phil Foden a bigger doubt. Heung-min Son feels like the real one that people are looking to buy alongside the ever popular Cole Palmer. Newcastle at home, Man United away, Arsenal at home for Cole Palmer before a really nice run of fixtures in game week 12. I expect Son to outscore Palmer over the next 3 game weeks, but then after that, from game week 12 onwards, I think Cole Palmer is one of the best picks in the game at the moment. So if I was looking to recommend to buy, Palmer and Son are right up there. If you've got luxury transfers, then yes, Son before Palmer. If you don't have luxury transfers, then I would just go straight to Palmer as the best long-term pick. Next up, let's have a look at Manchester United midfielder in Garnacho. Now, 6.2 million, he's dropped since the start of the season, and we all can agree that he is in their best lineup at the moment. They do have a really nice fixture run coming, and if you saw his finish in game week 8, he's absolutely someone we should be going and having a look at. The data is really strong when he does get those starts. It's just that reliability of minutes. But when you look at his performances, it's pretty difficult to think that he isn't going to go and get starts. Now, I probably would go and buy Brennan Johnson of Spurs over going and buying Garnacho at the moment. But he has got to be up there as one of the best differentials in the game at the moment. Just 8% selected. A lot of those were from the start of the game. Not many people are looking to buy him. So if you need a cheap midfielder, you don't want to go to someone like a McNeil. You've got a little bit more money. You don't want a Brennan Johnson. Garnacho, with the fixtures they've got, just looks like a much better asset. 2 million less than someone like a Bruno Fernandes, and is performing pretty consistently, whether he starts or off the bench as well. Now let's have a look at those cheap forwards. So a lot of the attention is looking at Chris Wood and the Wolves forwards, but we've also got Jimenez, who is continuing to return really well. His underlying data is actually the best of all the forwards that we've got on the list, and we expect him to do on penalties now that Andreas missed the one that we've seen. The short-term fixtures for Fulham are really nice, but it is worth noting that from about game week 12 onwards, they do start to turn a little bit. For me now, the best forwards to go and buy in the game are the Wolves forwards. Either Strand Larsen if you only have 5.5, or it is Cunha is worth the money, 1 million over going for Strand Larsen if you do have the money in the bank. And I know Chris Wood has been consistently returning, but if I had the choice now, I would also buy and go and buy Cunha over buying Chris Wood. So for me, the ranking goes like this. Cunha number 1, then it is Chris Wood, then it is Strand Larsen, then it is Jimenez, then it is Delap. If Danny Welbeck is confirmed fit, he is also one that we can add into the conversation. If Visa of Brentford is also available and available to start games as well, he came off the bench in the last one, then he can be added back into the conversation. Both of those in Welbeck and in Visa would go above Delap, but probably would stay below Jimenez. And then to finish off with a few final players you have asked me to discuss over on Twitter and in the YouTube community section. The first one is Matt Sells. So he's one of the best goalkeepers of the season so far, very cheap, and Forest have been the second best defense so far this season in terms of underlying data. Now, it is the goalkeeper I wanted at the start of the season. If I knew he was nailed, I would never have picked Henderson for game week 1. I don't massively think this is the time to go and buy Sells because the long-term fixtures are not as great. I would be looking at someone like Verbruggen, who does have the best long-term fixtures if you need a new goalkeeper. As I spoke about with Visa, when we know that he's available to start games, which is probably going to be game week 9, he is going to be worth a punt because of the first few weeks of the season, he was one of the best cheap forwards to own. And Ipswich at home this week, it's probably time and a great opportunity if you want to take a punt on a slightly different cheap forward outside of the Wolves guys who are going to be the most popular ones alongside Chris Wood. Next up is Rico Lewis. Now, he hasn't been returning as well and Gavardio has been doing well, but he is just 4.8 million still. I wouldn't be selling Lewis, of course, with a fixture at home Southampton this week, plus good fixtures coming up. Of course, Kyle Walker looks like he's got a slight injury and we don't have an exact return date. And while he's out, it looks pretty certain that Rico Lewis is going to be nailed for Manchester City. I can understand not wanting to buy Rico Lewis new, but right now he is a keep in your teams. And finally, McNeil remains as the best, cheaper midfielder. Once we get to game week 12, there is a nice run of fixtures for Bournemouth, so Semenya will come back onto the table. But right now, McNeil is still a buy. Lewis is probably a hold. You can buy Visa if you want a cheap differential up front, and Sells is probably an avoid still, although the underlying data does maybe suggest that even in the difficult fixtures, you can go and buy Sells based on the fixtures and the performances they had against Liverpool and Chelsea this season. So as I said, things are a little bit different and I hope the quality on all of these videos are still the same. All of it, of course, is taken from the Fantasy Football Scout members area. So go and check it out in the description if you are interested. Drop any questions about players in this video or elsewhere in the comment section if you want as well. And I'll get back to as many of those as I can. 2,000 likes is the aim. Subscribe if you're new around here, and I'll be back again very soon.